Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of HSP TV. I am your host, Barbara, and today I am joined by the wonderful Jake Trigg. And today we have a very special topic. It's something that most of you will recognize and will have to deal with at one point or another because it's emotions. And then specifically, emotional expression, emotional repression, and then emotional release. Because you have some experiences with it, right, Jake? And I have experiences with it, and you even wrote a book about it. So I thought that that will be a perfect topic to talk about today. I'm enjoying having you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. I'm honored to be here.
Wonderful. So how did you get into writing your book? There must be a story around that, right?
Yeah, it was definitely a surprise. I wouldn't have thought, looking 5 years back, that I would have done this, but it found me. So, it was really in my own journey. It was very sudden. I had a life-changing car wreck, and I actually got hit by a car. And coming out of that, I suddenly had my emotions could no longer be repressed as they were my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of learning on how to handle these new emotions that I had always had, but really hadn't ever come out like they were.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also having my own kids and working with their emotions too. You know how kids can help us reparent ourselves.
Yes.
And so it was sort of like putting this together as and just the universe giving me signs of the importance of emotions from my own personal journey, as
Mm-hmm.
well as for other men,
Mm-hmm.
and the importance that they play in relationship dynamics, and then for kids as well. And so writing a book was a way that I could see as making kind of the biggest impact for an audience that is sort of primed and ready to learn other ways to work with emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And thank you for sharing that. I've had a very serious car accident also, I think right before, or yeah, about 6 months, I think, before I ended up in my burnout. And I also remember that I had a very severe whiplash at that moment. And that made everything come in so much more. Even just going to the store for a toothpaste or something was a task I could barely complete. It was not just emotions, of course, that you cannot hold back anymore, but also sounds and smells and everything that's coming in. So to say that the car crash made an impact would be both literally and figuratively. So I love how you turned that into a book because yeah, we talked about this before we started recording, that as a women, it's sort of accepted, right? That we have emotions. Usually they say, oh, it's probably that time of the month when we show emotions, not something we women become very happy about, but at least it's sort of accepted. But as men, that is quite different.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think that this is so important for people to have whole and meaningful relationships, is to be able to communicate on that emotional level. Society teaches us about logic, and we are trained from early age to do math and science. And we have these powerful energies within us that affect how we behave and how we communicate. And so I find it so important for in relationships of all kinds to be able to communicate on that emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
But for men, yeah, generally we are not accessing these. And then we also, men are generally very sort of isolated, where women will often come together in community and, vent. And for a man, that can be seen as weakness. And so one of the things that I've gone to is men's groups. I think it's so important for men to have that place to go and share what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
I understand what you're saying. A lot of the people that I have helped are men, and what I also hear from them is a couple of different things. One is the way our society raises men and teaches men to be. The socially accepted image of a man needs to be strong and the caretaker and the head of the household and cannot show weakness. That's very long has been tradition among men, but also in cultures. I know that most Asian cultures don't really do emotions. So those men and women don't really learn how to handle emotions. But then as sensitive men or more sensitive men, also in our culture, what I hear is that they don't really fit in with other men. Other men have different interests, different hobbies. So they usually connect better with women than with other men. Was that also the case for you?
For me, you know, I've always had more male friends, to be honest. So a lot of what you said, it was true for me. But I would tend to have more male friends. But to your point, you know, I really love what Brene Brown has done with turning vulnerability into a strength.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like, that's really what we're coming around to is when we can share our vulnerable parts in the right circumstances, then it's actually a strength.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's new to so many of us, it's often messy.
Mm-hmm.
And where men tend to go wrong is society says we meet this one person and they're like our everything, and that's our relationship. And if we are now venting our emotions to that relationship, that can be too much and actually damage the relationship. So that's why it's important to have these friends or men's groups in order to have safe places in order to express and not put too much onto that other person.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There are people that think that the partner should be the answer to everything and that you should be able to go to your partner with everything. And while on a certain level, I agree, you should be able to go to your partner with everything. I also think that you shouldn't do it with everything. There are some things that I would rather talk about with my girlfriends, mostly women things, than that I would do with my partner. And of course, I would share the most important things, and communication is very important. But there are differences also in emotional experience between men and women. So it's really important to have another outlet for talking or emotion sharing or whatever needs to be there so that the burden doesn't always have to fall on your partner.
Yeah. I think another sort of lens to this too is that, you know, we are in a wonderful time now where we have this more equality and able to meet on level ground, but it wasn't always like that. And so a male expressing something as anger can be very triggering for a female, or the feminine rather, because traditionally it wasn't safe for thousands of years. And so I do want to acknowledge that, of like, especially if a man is not like used to expressing anger, it can come out as,
Mhm.
you know, damaging.
Mhm.
And so it takes time to practice and build up these skills so that we can relate and express ourselves in safe ways for the person that is receiving it.
Yeah, I agree, especially if the anger comes out with violence, which often is the case, or with the threat of violence. That's already enough to make especially a woman feel unsafe, because if we bluntly look at it, most men are just physically stronger than women. So if push comes to shove, a man will be easily able to overpower a woman, where the other way around, that's often not the case. So that also plays a factor, of course, in how safe or unsafe both partners feel in a relationship while communicating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so what do you think is maybe the main reason, or maybe even a couple of reasons for people to repress their emotions? Because that's what I see happening a lot, both in relationships, but also in the workforce. We tend to swallow and not express.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main reason is that we don't have very many stories that show healthy expression or healthy releasing. Like even if you look at a lot of the children's books or a lot of the techniques to work with emotions, most of them end in a stage of mindfulness. So, meditation or sitting with the emotion. And that is a wonderful practice. But if there's something that's really powerful that needs to come out and you just sit with it, like that's almost just bypassing it. Like these emotions, they're energies in motion. And by just sitting it, you're not actually giving it any motion. And so it ends up lodging in the system. And now you're telling your psyche, okay, what I feel isn't actually okay. Or yeah. And so I think that's why I wanted to write a book, is because I wanted to have this other story where it's a way of showing that it's safe to express and it's safe to share how we're feeling.
Mhm.
And just by giving that example, I think it gives permission for other people to do the same.
Yes, exactly. It's a multifaceted reason why people repress emotions. It can be that you never learned how to healthily express your emotions. Maybe you had parents who were cut off from their emotions. My mom is one of those people, but my dad also wasn't a really great example. There were also things wrong with him, so I never really saw healthy emotional expression as a child. And one of the healing methodologies that I use is the emotion code. And we can literally build a wall of emotions around our heart. We call it the heart wall. It's literally emotion stacked on emotion stacked on emotion of all those emotions that we do feel, but that we shove down deep, that we repress, that we don't acknowledge, and that we just, well, maybe just hope they go away by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you're speaking to is there's different, and it kind of borrows from internal family systems or parts therapy. You can have like protective emotions and vulnerable emotions, and something like love or joy can actually be quite vulnerable, or something like hurt. And so that heart wall, you may have been hurt as a young kid, and so that is that vulnerable part. And so then when something comes and triggers that, then a protection emotion like anger can come up. And so there is that like you said, multifaceted, where what is being presented as anger may actually be a lower, not a lower, but a more vulnerable emotion. And so that wall is that protection from that initial damage.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before I learned how to manage my emotions better, whenever I was on the verge of tears and I didn't want to cry because I didn't want to show weakness, I became angry or mad, because sadness and crying is disempowering. And at least by being mad, you feel like you sort of have control over something, but it's not a productive emotion to express.
Yeah, anger is great at making action and driving us to do something. And we're so trained that we always have to be doing. Whereas sadness is more about like accepting and clearing. It's the water, like when our tears are actually releasing chemicals through sadness. And so it is very natural and to move towards anger. And it's also much more sponsored by society. If you look at our stories in our movies and books, like anger is really and fighting is just kind of status quo.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing that I did really learn in my childhood is how to fight. Fighting has been also my downfall, because that did not allow me to flow with life. And it is a mechanism on one hand also to keep control over your life, or to gain control, or a deep desire to have control. But that's not what happens when you fight. You end up with something that, if you had a choice or had known about it beforehand, you would probably never have chosen.
Mhm.
So we talked about it already a little bit, but I want to go more into what is needed to express your emotions in a healthy way. And one of the things is vulnerability. We already talked about it, but how can people be vulnerable when they're scared, for instance?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it for a lot of people is to practice expression in safe environments, which might actually be by themselves.
Mhm.
And so my own personal journey was to working with a coach and a therapist, and doing things like hitting pillows or yelling into pillows, and really setting aside time each day to do these practices, because it can be so uncomfortable even to yell.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know all about that. But eventually I did start yelling, but then in the forest. And in the beginning, I was very self-conscious, who could be there, who could possibly hear me. But in the end, I didn't even care about who heard me or not. It's just, I felt last 2 weeks ago, I think one of my best friends unexpectedly died. And it felt so unfair, and there was so much anger and hurt and emotion around that situation, that I went in the woods and I let it all out, and I just screamed about the unfairness of it all and the things that happened before and after her death. And that is a good way of releasing your emotions in the moment that you're having them, without hurting the people around you that you probably love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful that you have that practice, forest time especially.
Yes. Yeah, nature has been a saving grace. I sometimes also go, no, yeah. When I cry, I always go in nature when I cry, but I don't always cry when I'm in nature. So that's the hesitation. But sometimes I just
So
feel,
beautiful.
yeah, right. Sometimes it's just, it feels like, I always say we have this internal bucket, and the top part is here where your mouth is, and the bottom part is right below your solar plexus, yeah, your power system. And during the day, your bucket fills with things that happen, unexpected things, emotions, stress, and such. And it is our job to empty the bucket every day so that you can start with the fresh bucket. But that doesn't happen all of the time. When we don't learn how to empty that bucket in between, the only way to do that is by sleeping, and sleeping long enough with the right type of quality. But sometimes when it becomes too much, your bucket is sort of overflowing. That's also when I love going in the woods and then just letting it stream, because I don't even remember where I found it, but at one point I learned that your tears are the pearls of your soul.
Mm.
I found that so incredibly beautiful. So every time I spill over and my tears come, I see it as a cleansing ritual of my soul releasing its pearls in order to make room for something new.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, there's an interesting thing that I've talked with other people about, and has happened for me, is sadness. I was very against crying, and really never cried at all in my life except for major events. And then when I started setting aside time and started crying and releasing, and then doing it for like, there was a solid month in the early stages where I was crying every day. And it hurt at first, but then it started to shift, and then it started to actually feel really good.
Mhm.
And so you can have multiple emotions at once, and it's really that restriction of us, saying that we're not supposed to do this, that makes it hurt. And then the sadness and crying itself, after you've cleared that, emptied the bucket so many times, your body knows what comes after this crying, and then it preps you. So then it feels good just to do it.
Exactly. And one of the things I teach my clients is that you cannot avoid feeling sad. You cannot be positive all of the time. And that's one of the pitfalls of the law of attraction, for instance, that people feel they always need to be positive, always need to be smiling, always need to be happy. And that as soon as you feel a negative emotion, that's then what you draw more of into your life. And that's not what you want. So you become very rigid in trying to maintain your happy facade without acknowledging the real feelings in that moment. So the thing that I always tell them is it's okay to cry, just don't get stuck in it. And what I usually do is I give myself 15 minutes at least of crying time, and I can just let go and just cry to my heart's content. But then eventually, when you really cry, your tears dry up. And that's the moment where you start looking at the silver lining in situation, or something that you could reward yourself with because you let your emotions out and you acknowledge them. And that's the moment when you start turning the emotion around and moving it towards a more positive feeling within yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And what were some of the ways that you both acknowledge your emotions and handle them?
Yeah. So a lot of it for me is in groups. So in men's groups, because I've gone to therapy for many years, and for me, it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same environment, and not quite as like provoking, I guess, as having other men there to really stir things up. And also, like, I think emotions are very much a shared experience too, or they can be, where in group settings and speaking with other people, like that can stir up the emotion the most, sort of like watching a movie and seeing something that's really moving. And so there is that sort of like the air that builds up in groups of you borrowing from the other people's energy. And so that, I think, has been really, profound for me. In the book, I talk about 3 steps to it, called The Way of Emotions is the title of the book. And the first step is witness. And in that step, you're really just like stepping back. It's sort of like the recognize in the RAIN method, stepping back and acknowledging that a part of you feels this way. So it's not necessarily yourself, it's just this part of you, and your whole self is centered, and you're just witnessing. And a witness is innocent, right? There's nothing wrong with you. You're just watching and identifying what is going on, and trying to take this emotion, and then really kind of tying into the emotion code, putting it into a place in the body, and putting sensations to this emotion. So this anger might be in your left arm, and it feels like tingy and hot. And so as you do that, it's really taking that power out of the emotion, the overwhelmingness of it, and embodying it, and also separating it from yourself.
Yeah, I recognize that, because we have, sometimes it sounds weird, but we sort of have multiple people in ourselves. We have what we call the inner child. That's the version of us that is still a little child, in my case, a little girl that has been hurt in her past by various people. And as adults, we can come into situations where that hurt is triggered. And then it's usually the little girl in me that responds to it, the little girl that's hurt, or the little girl that's sad. And that's something that you as an adult can witness.
Yeah. The inner child, that part is so important. That one of the biggest things of inner child is that's where we get our imagination. And children are naturally connected to this imagination. And when that part of us is shut down, and when we're through schooling and education and society, we connect more to our logic and less to our magic. And then we have to know, okay, what are all the steps I have to do to get somewhere? Whereas if we're in the imagination, we say, I want to get here, let me just start walking that way.
Mhm.
And so by reconnecting to this inner child, it really is opening up so much potential and so much less fear to be able to pursue your dreams, because
Yeah.
now you're reconnected to that imagination aspect.
Yes, so that's very important. And most of us adults have lost our ability to play and to see magic and to tap into the magic that is all around us. And that makes for very serious, dull sometimes existence.
Yeah, exactly. It's the logic and the magic. These are the two sides. But I see it all the time at playgrounds, with kids, screaming and yelling and just being kids, and then parents may be like, "Oh, that's weird," or "Don't do that too much." And
Yeah.
even me, I wrote a book about expressing emotions, and I still find myself with my kids, I still have to like stop myself from stopping them.
Correcting them. Yeah, but that's I did another video about that. I call that the Brules, the bullshit rules of life. That's
Uh,
because it's always been done that way, and parents teach children in roughly the same way about what is right and what is wrong, and
yeah,
what's socially accepted and what is not. And that's for a big part about behavior. Right? What's socially acceptable behavior? It's not socially acceptable to have a temper tantrum and to start yelling in the supermarket because you want candy.
yeah, right, absolutely. I often remind myself it's my kids are teaching me just as much as I'm teaching them, or possibly even more at this stage. I think they may be teaching me more. And I think that having that lens is just incredibly
Mhm.
helpful, because we can learn so much from children, and it's not our role just to tell them what to do all the time.
There was this video of a mom that had, I think, a 4 or 5 year old that wanted candy in the supermarket and that threw a temper tantrum. And instead of saying something, she threw herself on the floor and started screaming and rolling around. And the child was like, "Ooh." And it stopped immediately. He said, "Okay, so now we can go." I
That's
love seeing
hilarious.
that.
That's so great. Yeah, just join them on that level. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Yeah,
so wonderful.
that stopped it immediately. Very, very effective. It was very funny to watch.
Yeah, I think one other thing about parenting I've learned is, the parent's role is really to help the kid to regulate their emotions, because
Mhm.
up to a certain age, kids can't do it themselves. And where we can go wrong as parents is actually saying that that emotion is wrong, because then we're saying that that kid is wrong. And then what happens is that kid takes that and puts it and exiles that part.
Mhm.
That's not safe anymore over time. And
Exactly.
then that later on comes in the trauma when they're when they're grown up.
Exactly. And the parents don't mean it negatively. They don't mean to say that the kid is wrong, but that's how children interpret it, because children always think in terms of what did I do right and what did I do wrong. And if the parent is unhappy, angry, disappointed, then they blame it on themselves. And then if that happens too often, they try to avoid that type of behavior because they want their parents to love them and they start pleasing them, which indeed in later life causes serious issues.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so much of it is realizing that there may not be anything to do. It may be just being calm in that child's presence is what they need to learn.
Yes, exactly. And so
Mhm.
your first step is the W, witness.
Witness. Yeah. First is witness. And the second step is to accept. And that kind of speaks of what you're spot on there. Yeah, accepting or allowing can be another one, because sometimes things are so difficult it can be hard to accept it. And
Mhm.
in that case, allowing might be an easier term for people, in that
Mhm.
they're it's not that you're allowing the thing that happened or accepting that, it's that you're accepting or allowing your own
Yep. Yeah.
response. to it, instead of the restriction and saying, I need to do something about it. And so in the accepting, there's some phrases that I found helpful that I learned from parts therapy, which is saying, basically saying what it is and then saying, and everything else is okay. So aside from the burning anger in my left arm, everything else is okay. And what that will usually do is something else might come up that's not okay. And so it's an unraveling of what's really going on, because the anger you mentioned earlier, that might be some sadness or I forget what it was, but everything else is okay. Then that other part now comes up, and you repeat that to really like untangle the web that is this sensation, this emotion.
Exactly. So maybe acknowledge could also be a good word for it.
Acknowledge, yeah.
The emotion, but also the fact that you have emotions, that you're a human being with emotions, and that something happened that triggered an emotional response. You might not be particularly happy with the response, and you might want to work on reining it in or having a different type of response, but it doesn't change the fact that something happened that triggered you in such a way that you had an emotional response to it. Yeah. And this is a thing that happens for highly sensitive people often a lot more than for 80% of the rest of the world. So especially for the highly sensitive person, it is very important to learn how to manage their emotions by witnessing it, accepting, acknowledging the emotion, and then you have a third step, right?
Yeah. And just before that, on the allowing or accepting or acknowledging, where a lot of men go is trying to fix. And you see this play out in relationships where the woman, and I know I'm using traditional gender terms here, so that, it could be the whole range of the human experience, but in general, a woman might say, something is wrong, I feel this way. And then the man's like, okay, what do I do to fix that?
Yes,
and then
men are action takers.
We do it for ourselves too, where we're feeling bad. And so then we're like, okay, well, so I need to go work out, which might actually be a healthy response, or I need to go do whatever, XYZ. And it often that doesn't actually fix it, because the emotion is trying to tell you something. And so in a man's mind, if we're just always trying to do what's going to solve it, then that we don't actually ever solve it. We just add more things. So the allowing, that's the really like being with it and just being in that space. Because what often happens is, like, when you pay attention to a thought or emotion that is repeating over and over again, like, you don't have to let go of it because it lets go of you. Now that you've given it the acknowledgement, it says, okay, I'm seen and I'm done here. I'm going to move on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's indeed the whole message behind why I teach my clients to not push their emotions away, but just set a timer for 15 minutes, let the emotions be there completely, feel it, scream, cry, pound on the pillow, or whatever it is that you need to do to acknowledge the emotions and let them out, and then move on with the next thing.
Yeah.
I love it.
So the third step is express. And that one, and I'm very intentional in the expression, because where we have most books sitting with it and just letting something happen. And expression is the opposite of repression. The opposite of depressed, to press down, is to express and send out. And even if you look at, like, emotional intelligence is the term that most people use, but now we're taking something that's logical and applying it to emotions. So even in the common term, we're still not expressing. Kids naturally express, like, they're connected to their own expressions.
Yes.
And so I wanted to write this children's book of saying, let's have a forum where parents actually meet kids where they're at. And in doing so, like now we can actually just be on the same page, and yeah, and just let kids express what they have inside them.
I've always found this fascinating. I speak about this with multiple people. We're actually born into this world with our gifts and without any restrictions. As children, we don't doubt ourselves. We don't feel unworthy. We don't feel not good enough. We feel like we can explore anything. We can do anything, and we are adventurous. And somewhere it goes wrong. Somewhere along the line, we learn to rein everything in, to box ourselves into this box that we need to fit in, maybe restrict ourselves even more with labels. And then we need to uphold the image of what we want people to have from us. And then eventually it goes wrong. And then we need to unlearn everything to go back to how we already were when we were born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we are these infinite beings and born into this physical reality, and then we learn the rules of this physical reality and try to conform to those.
Exactly. But I can also imagine situations, I've had them personally, where you have an emotional response at a moment where you don't really want to have it. For me, that was when I was called into the office and quite unexpectedly got told that one of our biggest clients had left our company and that the company needed to fire half of the people and that I was one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And that triggered a massive emotion that I didn't want to show towards my boss at that moment. How would you advise people to handle situations like that?
Yeah. So the thing about, you kind of talked about that bucket analogy of emptying out. Well, where a lot of people, if you're not doing these practices regularly, some situation like that might trigger or really cause damage. But if you are preemptive in doing this work, you are like, when that situation arises, it's much, much easier to handle. And so there is always, the right place and the right time for expression, because it's based on, what is the message that you need to get across to this other person so that you can work together. And that is still very important. And so by doing the practices and being clear, that comes up and you can much better handle it. In that moment, like there could be some body techniques. You might like have some clearings, like, and I know you like NLP, and so you can do some anchoring, that sort of thing, of anchoring in some happy moments and going back to that. But I would actually, in that situation, I would defer to breathing. I would do long exhales and really clearing out, clearing that energy out, and then shorter inhales.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. If your level in your bucket is already high, then the chances of overflowing are slimmer. So if you can maintain a nice level in your bucket at all times, then things like that won't immediately cause you to overflow. So that's why regular practices with expressing emotions is very important. But if you've never done anything with emotion management and you have not learned about anchoring or no clue what it is, then those techniques indeed will be difficult. But the thing that you're always in control of is your breath. So at any moment, you can choose to start breathing towards your feet and maybe not pay as much attention to what's being said in the room, but really focus on going inward, following your breath, making your breath a lot longer, because that will help you regain control over your emotions. And while you might not be able to express them in that moment, you need to create time for yourself to express them at a later moment. So then when you get home and you get in your safe space, probably your house, maybe the woods or your car, if you cannot wait until you get home, create that space for yourself where you say, okay, and now I'm going to acknowledge all of these feelings. I'm going to acknowledge the hurt and the disappointment and everything that might have come with hearing your news, and then just letting it out, especially when you have a family, children. Your car might actually be a really good and safe environment to just let everything out before taking it home towards your family, but expressing it in a healthy way without internalizing it. Because if you never express the emotions that came with the situation that happened, then it's going to manifest as pain or illness or stuck energy, blocking you from attracting what you want in your life, maybe causing you eventually, if you do it often enough, to have accidents. I'm convinced that that was a big part of why I had the car accident. Yeah, you too. And so that's the way of the universe, of source energy, God, however you want to call the higher energy that's out there, for us to become aware of that what we're doing is not healthy for us, and that we need to find a healthier way of dealing with the things in life that happen, because you cannot shield yourself from everything. You cannot make bad things not happen. You cannot make bad news not come. You don't have any control over other people or what they say or what they do. The only thing you have influence over is yourself, and how you let it impact you, but also how you handle it and how you express it at a later moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love what you said there about the universe giving us signals. And it's much easier to catch that early on because it doesn't have to be a car wreck. You know, we do get these signals, but the thing is, they can often start off very quiet, and then if you don't pay attention, it gets a little bit louder, and then it gets a little bit louder, and then eventually it gets to a point that you can't ignore it. And I think that's really what's happening when in so many people's lives with disease. Is those are the signals. Those are the signals saying this needs to change. And yeah, and the best thing to do is just look at it and be with it and clear it.
Yes. Exactly. Or find people that can help you move through your emotions. I've many different techniques, and Jake has many different techniques of moving through your emotion, and also of freeing yourself of certain emotion. Because what I said about the thing that you experienced as a child that's triggered in your adult life, you can neutralize the thing that can be triggered in your adult life so that it will not be triggered again, by working through the emotion and by finding someone that helps you work through the emotion, so that you can release yourself from it, or breaking down that hard wall with the emotions that are there, so that you free yourself for more joyful living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I've been really, really loving our talk. I think we shared some really wonderful gold nuggets for people that are out there. But everybody, regardless if you're a highly sensitive person or not, has emotions, experiences emotions. Highly sensitive people might experience it more often or more deeply. I'm not completely sure, but everybody has emotions. So thank you for this amazingly insightful talk. I can also imagine that the listeners and the viewers out there might want to know more about you, or where they can find you or connect with you. So where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me as Jake Trigg on Facebook. I post a lot of inspirational content there, and that's the best way to reach out to me. And then my book is The Way of Emotions, spelled WAE, and that's available on Amazon.
I love it. I will make sure that all the links are below this show episode. So if you didn't catch it, no worries. You can read it down here. Just click on the more information part below the video. And if you've been watching, and if you have really loved this episode, it would mean the world to both of us if you would like it. If you have questions, comments, or want to share your story, please feel free to do so. We will respond to it personally. And if you feel that this might even be really valuable for other people in your circle of influence, then please share this episode on your social media so that other people can hear this message as well. Thank you, Jake, for being here tonight. Thank you for this wonderful, inspirational talk, and for being on my show. And I look forward to the next time that our paths cross.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thanks everybody for watching.
Bye, everybody.